At the beginning of our unusual story, outside the Jail High School gym, bad guys were beating up one guy, but they decided not to stop there. So one of the hooligans picked him up. This guy wanted the guy they were beating to dye his hair a different color. And if he didn't, they'd beat him again. The bullies gave him 1 day to do it and threw him on the floor. But this guy named Lee Sung-hyun claimed that it was his natural hair color. It was some unique trait of his. And it turns out he was so poor, he couldn't even afford to lighten his hair. The big guy didn't like that, so he started warming up for another barrage of punches. He ordered his friends to hold Lee, and he was going to beat him up. After this situation, we are transported to an ordinary school day, where the teacher asks the students to take their seats. And at that moment, a Lee jumps into the classroom, which surprised and angered the teacher. Standing there covered in blood, he apologized to the teacher, which looked very strange. But as it turned out, even in his class, he didn't belong. Everyone thought Lee was a loser. As he sat down in his seat, a classmate approached him. Her name was Bae Ji-hyun. She was his classmate, and she asked Lee about who beat him up. The unique feature of this girl was her beauty, and the fact that she was the head teacher. But Lee didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so he said they just talked. Bae wasn't happy with that answer, but she still decided to help, at least with some tissues for Lee to wipe off the blood. Lee thanked her for her generosity and decided to take advantage of it. The girl also added that she couldn't just drop the case, so she decided that they should talk to the teacher after class. But Lee didn't need that kindness, because he knew that if he told his teacher, he would tell his parents, which would make things much more difficult. But even B.A. didn't agree with that, because she didn't think it was normal for him to be beaten up every day. Even so, Lee continued to pretend that everything was fine, and said again that he was just fooling around with that guy named Sunbae. But he did decide to explain that he was just happy with the way things were. Those words only made B even angrier. She didn't understand why he was being a wuss, and she thought that's why he was being picked on. Lee suddenly decided to tell a story about when he lived in the village, and there he was bullied much more because of his gray hair. That's why he transferred to this school, and he doesn't want to annoy his parents anymore. So he just asked her to blow it off and not worry about him. She agreed, and she apologized for pushing without knowing the circumstances. Lee was pleased with this answer, and also decided to ask her one question. He asked her to go to their secret place that night, which made her very embarrassed. She started talking about not letting anyone at school know about it, because then it would be a major topic of discussion. We're moving to Kanama evening time. Lee prodded Bae, arguing that the longer she hesitated, the more likely it was that they wouldn't get the number down in time. Bae was embarrassed again, and as it turned out, she was afraid of being seen by someone, so she wanted Lee to go and check first to see if anyone from their school was there. When he heard that, he decided to start shouting that the head of the class from Jail High School was here, and called out her name. She got angry about it and started kicking him, but Lee dodged it. Then he started mocking, saying that no one would expect a good-looking head woman to be in a place like this, while the DJ at the club was trying to cheer people up, and B was rocking the stage as another DJ. Lee was happy for her, so he decided not to bother her anymore. He stepped aside and started smoking cigarettes, thinking about his hard life. People were discussing how good B was that day. At that moment, the very same hooligans came to their club and immediately began to visually assess the place. The manager came up to Lee and asked him to escort the three to their seats, leaving Lee speechless. He decided to greet them kindly, despite everything that had happened in the past. But the fact that he was a waiter here really surprised and interested this bully. He called him a loser, but Lee was used to such words by now, and he realized something else, that Bae was still on stage. The hooligans started ordering him to show them a better place, but Lee realized he couldn't let them in. The best solution he could come up with was to say there were no seats available. He decided to piss them off a little by saying that there are too many people near the stage, so there's no room for pigs like these hooligans. The bully couldn't stand to be treated that way, so he got pretty pissed off. He grabbed Lee and started making death threats right here, right now. The man took a swing at Lee and everyone knew how it was going to end. But suddenly, with incredible speed and skill, he dodged with incredible speed and skill. And then he grabbed my arm and started trying to pull some kind of a move. He was able to do it, and with that move, he knocked the big guy face down on the floor. Lee was glad to be able to avenge everything here, and to get them away from this place. The bully couldn't let that pass, so he ordered Lee to be caught. At the same time in the dressing room, BA was watching her performance online, and it was very popular with 200 million views on YouTube. A man came in and told her that Lee and some bullies got into a fight. She was interested in this information, so she asked me to elaborate. The guy just put out all the information he could get. This really surprised Bae, so she urgently needed to find out her friend's whereabouts. Bae sweat dropped, recognizing Lee toppling one bully to the ground and tearing toward the exit. Without thinking long, she ran for the exit, thanking the guy for the information. On the street behind the club, 3 hooligans beat up Lee, saying various insults against him. The leader of these bullies got angrier every time he remembered what Lee did to him. He hit him without trying to restrain himself, causing each blow to knock Lee to the floor. The guy claimed they spared Lee, and he in turn doesn't appreciate it and keeps pissing them off. And now he intends to beat him very badly, sparing no time or effort. At that moment, a voice came from outside, which Lee could barely hear in his troubled condition. It was Bae who asked about Lee's current well-being. At first, she didn't see what was going on, so she tried to open the door, but it was unsuccessful because it was locked. There was a small window in the door, so she could see the situation, and Lee began to tell her who these people were and explained that if they recognized her, all the blows he had received were useless. She's also called him weak in the past, but now he wants to show that he has courage. There was thunder and purple lightning, and for some reason, the bully leader began to shrink in pain. His assistants started to worry about his condition, so they started running up and trying to do something to help. B couldn't believe this guy was turning into such a creature. He totally became a monster and started screaming all over the street like there was nothing left of his mind. Lee couldn't understand what was going on with this bully right now, so he didn't know how to act in such a situation. The monster immediately rushed towards Lee to obviously kill him. He was really scared because he couldn't figure out what this shark-like creature was, at which point someone behind him ordered him out of the way. Some kind of huge purple sphere flew past Lee, which hit the monster precisely and did some damage to it. There were plates flying in the air, controlled by the same man who threw that orb. She was a beautiful, elegant, filigree girl who was actually an incredibly strong. It was B who looked completely different than she did at school or at the club. Such an appearance surprised Lee, and to be exact, frightened him, for he had not expected to be attacked by such a monster and to be sapped by BA. She began to order him to stand behind her, for the bully had completely reincarnated into a phantom. But none of this gave Lee any clues, so he started telling his theories. BA began to tell that since ancient times, the human race has fought the monsters hiding in the deep depths of this world. Fighting them, they were able to find their way to defeat them, and so the spirits of the law appeared, able to take the power of the force together. She went on to explain that a phantom is a condition in which a monster has managed to infiltrate and take over a human body, and to exorcise the monster, they use the spirits of the law. And there are only humans who can use the spirits of the law, and these people are scattered all over the planet and can't help but realize their power. They are known as some kind of law mages. After saying that, BA launched her new attack. With this technique, she raised the sphere to an even larger size than the previous one, which looked really incredible. That surprised Lee even more. He couldn't believe Bae had done it. He had too many questions about the whole thing. At that moment, he realized that he wanted to understand who Bae was, because the title of Law Wizard gave him absolutely nothing. To remove unnecessary emotion from Lee, she immediately asserted that there was no need to be afraid because she was only one of the mages of the law. And in addition, her master had determined that her talent and abilities were a head above the majority. But the monster didn't really stop there, and when they relaxed quite a bit, it appeared behind Lee's back. Bei had seen the blood with her own eyes, and one outcome was to be expected. Lee was very seriously injured, and seeing him, Bei couldn't help herself. So she started screaming his name at the top of her voice. The creature stabbed him through, which to the average person is instant death, with no survival options. The assistants didn't know what to believe, because their boss had turned into such a monster, but they refused to believe it. Bei, in turn, began to cry as she watched her friend and acquaintance die, for she could not have expected such an eventuality. After that, the monster started growling loudly again, and threw the remains of Lee's body directly towards Bei. She tried to call out to him again, but her attempts were unsuccessful. His body was absolutely motionless. Bei decided that she had to kill the phantom if she still wanted to save Sao Hyun. But looking at the power of the phantom's attacks, she realized that she couldn't get any closer because there was a chance that it would be extremely hard to dodge it. And at that moment, the seemingly quiet, calm girl, who turned out to be a mage, began to use her ability, which she called the Blade of the Sun and Moon. She decided to test this ability on such a powerful phantom, and she believed her strength would be enough to win. The monster mistook these projectiles for enemies, so he tried to fight them off or eat them because he has no mind. Bei saw it and realized he'd fallen for the trap she'd set. But the surprise was that her shells went somewhere, and the monster was already critically close to her. And being so near, he was preparing to make his attack already, which might be decisive, as his every attack he was able to do it, which threw Bei aside just like the bullies threw Lee aside. The only thing she realized as she lay on the floor was that this phantom was too strong, and it looked like she wasn't going to make it this time. Bei had already figured this would be the end of her life. Death by a slick, huge, powerful phantom. At that moment, she heard a voice that was annoyed, saying that all she wanted to do was live a normal life. But for some reason, everyone was getting in his way. That voice was quite familiar, so Bei was very surprised. The man went on to say that he'd be willing to go through hell to have a peaceful, normal life. It was Lee with a hole in his chest, and he was angry that the phantom had gotten this far. In an angry voice, Lee mumbled something to himself about phantoms. Then he went behind the monster's back and started muttering about the mages of the law. And he couldn't take it anymore, talking about how he was fed up with everyone. So he asked the phantom to back off nicely. Bei couldn't believe her eyes, because even as a law mage, she couldn't think that Lee could survive. And while she was talking about it, his wound was healing at an incredible rate. Even the monster sensed Lee's aura and instinctively became frightened, causing it to jump aside. But he wasn't going to let the phantom go far, so he grabbed it with one hand. He ordered him to get out of here as fast as he could, and after saying that, he threw the phantom like a stick, even though he had just defeated Bei, who is a law mage. Bei herself also realized that not only was Lee so strong, but he didn't have a tattoo of the law. He leaned toward her, and she began to suspect something and start to realize. Lee looked at her to see if she was still alive, because he needed to examine the wound. Upon examination, it was clear that the wound wasn't serious, so everything should have been fine. At this point, she assumed and decided to say her question as to whether Lee was a law mage. He decided not to answer that question and just started to raise Bei. Bei again suggested that the tattoo on Lee's arm was the law's tattoo. She couldn't stand being ignored by him, so she kept asking the question, and he got serious. He stood still, the rain falling, and the lightning behind him adding to the excitement. But once again, Lee didn't answer and asked Bei to stop asking questions. At this point, Bei stopped asking questions as well and alerted him to the fact that a phantom had gotten behind him. The monster actually stood up and prepared to attack, and Lee was angry that he still hadn't given up on it. Lee used some sort of ability called Evolving Flame, which began to release fire from his eyes and body. His hand also began to ignite and create quite a powerful attack. This strike resembled a yin and yang silhouette that had a golden rim, like a portal to another dimension. The monster took a lot of damage from that blow, so its mouth began to expand and its screams echoed throughout the area. But he's not going to stop now, so it's only logical to realize that this monster better not even get up. The phantom came out of that bully abruptly, thanks to Lee's punch, which Bei was incredibly surprised by. She was surprised that he had banished him in one blow, and now the bully was unconscious. He briefly lit a cigarette, saying that he didn't care about phantoms or hooligans. The only thing Lee wanted was to live peacefully. He said it was nice to meet Bea and decided to leave before she started bugging him. He also thanked her for being his friend all this time, but she didn't want that to happen, so she started asking where he was going and why. But Lee was getting farther and farther away, taking one step at a time. In another attempt to get up and stop him, Bei fell to the floor, for she was completely exhausted. He did stop, but only because he wondered why she wouldn't leave his mind. A couple of days later, 2 schoolboys were late for school, so they ran as fast as they could. They barely made it on time, and the girls started blaming the guy for almost being late because they could have just taken the bus. They looked at the whole class and realized that Lee wasn't going to be here today, but the guy didn't care about it, so he suggested the girl didn't care about it either. Hearing this, she only thought he was being rude. She asked him to be nicer, because Bea still cares about him. Sitting at her desk, she thought about where Lee might have gone. It had been 3 days, and she hadn't even thanked him properly. And at that moment, Lee loomed over her and said that this was his place. Through the time at 1721, a beautiful sunset could be seen on the roof of Jael High School. And on this rooftop in the beautiful sunset, Lee was lighting another cigarette. And that's when someone started pouring out a Coke. He was surprised by that, and surprised that Coke-flavored cigarettes. It was Bei. She poured a Coke on Lee's head and asked him to stop. She thought a student can't smoke in school, especially since she's the head teacher, and if she noticed it, she should fix it. But today she was ready to close her eyes, but she still wanted to know what had happened that day. Of course, Lee wasn't ready to tell me that for a variety of reasons. But he still angrily replied that nothing had happened and explained the situation by saying that he had just saved a man named B.A. But for some reason, Lee wanted to see her again and again, and Lee noticed that she was wearing sky blue striped panties today. She got mad because he was staring up her skirt and wished he was dead. Lee started talking about how being a law wizard meant a lot to him. His father was also a law mage, and that's why his father was always out of sorts. Every day, he would train Lee to fall down or simply beat him and swear at him, and his father's attitude toward Lee was as if he were his sworn enemy. After hearing this story, Bei decided to ask why his father treated him like that. It was probably because his mother died a long time ago. He went on to say that, since ancient times, people who associate themselves with law mages have sacrificed many things, including their own lives, which is why his mother died because of him. After his mother's death, his father coached Lee much harder, and he knows that his father suffered through her death too. Most likely because of his loss, he vowed to make Lee the strongest mage in the law. He wanted to make sure Lee could protect the people he cared about. But he was always letting his father down, so as a result, he became a disappointment to him. And all because he's a lawkeeper, Lee is a useless lawkeeper who couldn't protect his own mother. That's why he swore that he would hide this fact and live a quiet, peaceful life. He no longer wanted to watch people close to him suffer because of him, because he just wanted to live a normal life. He wanted to live a more normal life than most normal people. He wanted no one to pay attention to him. unnoticeable like a grain of sand in the sea, so that even if he disappeared, no one would notice. Lee believes that being a law mage is not for him at all, so he doesn't want to see other people suffering again. So the best outcome for him is to stay in the shadows. He just wants the people he cares about to enjoy their lives and lived happily ever after with no problems, with the ability to make plans for the next day. Bei has decided to assume that he has fallen in love with her and therefore protects her and considers her a valuable person to him. But he immediately started denying it, saying it wasn't like that, arguing that Ba was the queen of the school, so he couldn't dare fall in love. He also added that he didn't mean it, and simply put, he didn't want to get involved in anything else as a law mage. She decided not to argue and asserted that if Lee wasn't going to become an official law wizard, Lee interrupted her, saying that he himself knew what it meant to be an unofficial law mage. In the world, there is a certain heavenly association, an organization created by powerful and organized mages of the law. And if a person is a member of it, he is granted the status of an official mage of the law. He is sent to tasks and missions that a person must perform. But as for law mages like Lee who are not part of the organization, they are treated badly, criticized harshly, and end up being victims of their abuse. Bei couldn't understand why Lee wouldn't want to join them and become an official Magoi of the law if he knew so much. But for this reason, people who are dear to him may be in danger. So he decided it's better to live like the last creature, will live quietly and stay low. In this case, no phantoms will not come. Lee was worried that the Celestial Association would refuse to leave him alone. But Ba thought it was all wrong, as was the judgment that phantoms only came at the mercy of law mages. But he didn't want to talk about it anymore, so it doesn't matter now. Such statements and excuses surprised and displeased Ba. She asked if Lee was serious now, and Lee said, but Lee didn't even think Ba thought he was a real responsible person if he really doesn't see his point of view. So he wanted to ask her to act like nothing had happened that day. She was amazed that he was telling her to ignore the fact that he was a law mage and to not say anything to the Celestial Association. But Lee wasn't going to get involved in her quest, and he would never use his law magic again, and even if he needed help, he would just ignore it. Bei took it to mean that Lee was pushing her away, asking her to stay out of the way, which made Lee think it would be easier to cut all ties, which only made Bei laugh. But still, she started crying because she decided to do as he asked. These two parted on the grounds that they both hoped to never see each other again. Sometime later, nighttime, a subway station with quite a few people in it, and there was Ba, walking home and not understanding why Lee was still following her. He was definitely getting on her nerves with his strange behavior, especially after everything that had happened. Bei couldn't stand it and decided to ask Lee directly the reason why he was following her around. She was angry that he told her to break all ties with each other, but for some reason he's following her like nothing happened. But as it turns out, he was just going this way and Bei was overreacting. Lee had a new part-time job he was on his way to. It was right across the street from a club called Crystal. For Lee, it was an incredibly normal part-time job at a convenience store. For Bei, it seemed very insulting and humiliating, making her feel like an idiot. Lee went on to say that unlike Ba, he's not popular, and he doesn't have anything he's good at, so he's going to live the life of a regular high school student, working a regular part-time job. He had long ago made up his mind to live an ordinary life, and after these words, he went indoors to. Now our story that at 11:45 p.m., the convenience store is the king of materialistic. People were thanking the staff inside, standing behind the cash registers. He wondered what B was doing now, and if he was thinking of him, at which point another man walks up to him and puts the money with a pack of condoms. Lee said right off the bat that it would cost $5. He offered his girlfriend to stay a little longer in the store, but you could tell by the look on her face that he was in no condition to drink anymore. A man named Appa approached her and claimed that if she took a shower, he would make her feel better, to which she agreed. At this point, Lee was staring at them intently, making Appa wary. As it turned out, he admired the man, saying he was truly incredible for getting a girl like that. Lee asked the man to at least give his number and take it with him the next time the man went out. But Appa wasn't interested, so he just rudely asked for the number. For him, it was the normal life he's always dreamed of. But he was still sad that the man wouldn't give him his number, and Lee thought it would be cool if Appa taught him how to pick up girls. The next day, almost nothing of interest happened, and time passed incredibly slowly. And at this point, someone had put 2 packs of condoms back on the counter and intended to buy them as quickly as possible. Lee, as the seller, couldn't refuse and quoted the price of a 2-pack. This time he decided to tell Appo directly how cool he thought he was, so he asked the man to leave contacts, but he wouldn't listen to him and ordered him to just punch the merchandise as fast as possible. When Lee sold him the goods, he decided to try to ask Appa to teach him how to harness girls. He really just wanted to follow Appa and learn a lot from him. And again the next day, Lee was just shocked at what he saw, not knowing what was going on in the world. Appa wanted to buy condoms as usual, and Lee saw another girl as B.A. He decided to ask the man if B was his girlfriend. The man answered in the affirmative, and B.A. replied that it shouldn't bother the average cashier. But Lee got angry and put his foot on the counter and said it was important to him. He needed to know what B.A.'s relationship was with Appa. But B.A. didn't think he should be concerned about their relationship, and Lee's role was just to get the goods. At this point, Appa realized something was wrong, so he asked directly if they knew each other. But after that question, they both turned around and claimed they didn't know each other at all. At this point, B.A. decided not to waste the moment, snuggled up to Appa, and asked him to sleep with her sooner rather than later. Naturally, Lee didn't like it, but he decided that she could do whatever she wanted. So from now on, they would forget about each other forever. And on emotion, he said that B.A. could even forget about the fact that Lee had saved her life earlier. However, Lee decided to put the price for 2 condoms as much as $100, which surprised Appa very much, because yesterday the price was 10 times less. After leaving the store, B.A. told Appa that she was dizzy, and he decided to walk her home as soon as possible. After this situation, Lee, sitting on the chair, pondered on the reason why he reacted this way. After all, they no longer had any business in common, and all he should have to do is quietly live his normal life. And that same evening he went somewhere, lurking in the shadows of the night. He was spying on them and thinking that App not only had good looks, but a rich man's house. On the 2nd floor, in App's bedroom, B was lying in bed, with pleasant music playing around her. She lay so carefree and sexy that any man would want her. At the same time, Lee was hiding in the room looking at B.A., who was calling Appa to her bedside. Lee was surprised at how relaxed she was, and he was also trying to convince himself that he hadn't come here because of anxiety, but just to chat with Appa. But at this point, she said the opposite of what she said a couple minutes ago. She said to wait a bit for Appa, claiming she's still undressed, so she's not ready to start. That made Lee very tense and excited, because he didn't expect it. But at that moment she started looking at Lee and asking about why he was here, assuming he was worried about B.A., and according to her, it really touched her heart. She started talking about how she'd heard from the Celestial Association that all the girls who went out partying were on the missing persons list, and the head office said it was the work of a phantom. And after understanding the situation, B.A. quickly and easily realized that Appa was the phantom. She grabbed Lee's arm and started talking about how she knew Appa was a phantom the moment she stepped into the house, because she could feel a strong phantom aura coming from the basement. Lee tried to talk himself out of it, saying he didn't want to go there because he wasn't too crazy about phantoms. But B.A. didn't understand why he had come. But Lee explained that he was worried that Bae was too drunk to find her way home. And even when Ba thought it was all excuses, Lee kept saying he didn't want to go downstairs. But in a few moments, against his will, he was already downstairs. The first thing Bae noticed was that there was a powerful phantom aura emanating from here, and the amount of it was staggering. But Lee was only struck by how dark it was. Lee lit a lighter and said aloud that guests had come, so the host should not sit around without greeting them. After these words, he threw down his cigarette, asserting that it was not nice to behave like that in front of guests, and this cigarette was caught by a rather pale hand, and whoever caught that cigarette was smiling, laughing maniacally. It was Appa, who claimed he knew they were coming, and Appa had a bunch of those missing girls around him. He greeted Lee and Bae, inviting them to join him in his fun. Lee was jealous as hell because Appa was sitting with 6 girls at a time, and for a second he thought about joining in. But Ba didn't like the sight at all. Bae didn't appreciate that Lee liked it all, so she hit him and called him a pervert. He didn't see it coming, and he claimed she should hit the phantom instead of him. Appa started to state how adorable a couple of Lee and Ba would make, and that he was looking forward to feasting on a magician girl since he hadn't tried it in a while. But he realized that Ba was already busy with a hero like Lee, but it didn't matter to him, for he could devour even a mago baby, though he had never tasted one before. And that was why Appa was so curious as to what Lee tasted like. Lee began playing the role of the waiter who called App's preferences strange, and went on in character to say that in movies, villains who talk too much always lose in the end. Lee braced himself for the inevitable fight, and his desire to beat up someone like Appa was growing by the second, so he immediately started using his move. His hand started to ignite, and Appa realized that Lee was no joke. But he just laughed, because he had already thought of a plan of action. Lee approached him, preparing to hit him as hard as he could, just as he had hit the previous phantom. Suddenly, Appa grabbed the girl by the throat, and Ba realized what was about to happen. He put that girl right out there as a human shield in front of Lee's fist. Lee realized that things were getting bad, and something had to be done immediately. And sure enough, when his fist was almost to the girl, he stopped. Appa knew Lee wouldn't let himself hit the girl, especially since she was already in trouble. In App's opinion, the mages of the law talk so much about their justice and defense of the weak, but as he believes it's all nonsense, and with conscience, they will never defeat App. He used his hold on Lee, thereby shooting him in the face, causing Lee to fall to the ground. Bae began to feel very worried about him, for he was flying without stopping, and he was bleeding profusely. She couldn't forgive such a thing, so she took up the fight herself, and she wasn't going to feel sorry for anyone. The first trick she used was wind cyclones. However, this only made App laugh. He thought they were really stupid and pathetic. He just didn't believe that they could defeat him using such mock tricks. There was an explosion which raised quite a lot of dust, but in the midst of this dust, Appa kept laughing. His expectations of Bae were too much to live up to. He didn't expect her to be able to do that and also use the balance of body strength. But as it turns out, she's out of luck, because her natural powers that she's trying so hard to kill him with are useless, because she can't even break through those girls, and she can't even try to attack him because of the risk of hitting the girls. Lee wondered about the balance of body strength he was talking about, and Ba affirmed that he was telling the truth. Then she began to tell that the equilibrium forces of the body are invisible to the eye, but all living beings are composed of spiritual, vital, and essential forces. These 3 elements are parts of the equilibrium forces in the body, and these forces can evolve into the following form. The next form is known as balanced power, and the power of the body is defeated by the power of control of Appa, and it is defeated by the power of Bi, which is called the power of transformation. But either way, they're in a bad position now, because BA can't attack him because he's using the girls as shields. At this point, Appa realized that BA was really smart and decided to tell her something interesting. Namely, that the source of his food is the body's power users. He's just making some movements, and because of that, he can easily take over their bodies. And now Appa has ordered Lee to kill BA. He turned into a real puppet who said one word, kill. Unable to disobey orders, he turned around. Bae just couldn't believe it, so she tried to call Lee by name, but he didn't listen to her and took the first swing with his fist. But it was just an act, and in an unexpected moment, Lee began to turn around and reverse the direction of the blow. Now his blow was coming straight at Appa, who could not possibly have expected this. Lee couldn't believe that Appa actually believed that his tricks would work on Lee. This time the blow struck Lee right in the chin, causing Appa to fly into the air and blood to spurt from his mouth. It was a really hard hit that caused Appa to wildly misunderstand the situation. Lee started talking about how his father didn't even teach him unnecessary things like balance and balanced forces. He swung to deliver another mighty blow in the air, and hitting that his father didn't teach him all this stuff because Lee is a scumbag. This blow literally sealed his opponent to the floor with the incredible force that was inside Lee. Bae didn't understand the reason Lee was calling himself a scumbag. Lee himself was sitting on Appa and claimed that if it wasn't for the girls Appa was using as a shield, Lee would have knocked out all his organs. And if he nails him like this, Appa can't use the poor girls anymore, and now to make the world one less scumbag in the world, Lee's gonna kill Appa. He began to prepare his next incredibly strong punch, which made his fist fiery, causing bright flames and smoke to come out of his hand. This blow was called the sentence of the Divine Emperor, and there are few who can defend themselves against it so easily. The flames subsided, but a pile of dust rose up all around, all because of one hard blow from Lee. He looked at Appa with a judgmental look and pondered various things, and then asked how a weakling like Appa dares to try to be a tough phantom. At that moment, this phantom started to come out of the person's body and run away as fast as possible. But some part of the phantom still remained, and she didn't understand how this could happen to a phantom as strong as he was. But Lee was quick to explain that it's all about skill differences, and it always works that the weak lose to the strong. He then began to slowly approach Bae, causing her to be surprised and wary at the same time. He gave her the thumbs up and claimed that this was the second time he'd saved her, despite everything that had happened. However, she asked to stop playing the idiot because she'd seen Lee standing there for a couple minutes, ogling and drooling over half-naked girls. 10 minutes later, they were sitting outside the house, and Lee wondered how they could leave it like that, and what would happen to those girls. But as BAE explained, the special forces had already gone to that place. After hearing this information, Lee decided that in that case, he could go, because if his boss found out that he was not at work, he would be fired, and in their times, it is very hard to find a normal part-time job. At which point 4 guys in suits with capes came in, and they walked elegantly at a leisurely pace, and apparently the main one ordered his assistants to find the right man before entering the building. They all went to the basement of the house and told the leader that they'd found who they were looking for. Appa was caught, and he was brought to his knees like a weak puppy who can't fight back. The ringleader started interrogating him, and the first question was if he remembered what happened, but he replied that he didn't know anything. And the last thing he remembered was kissing a girl in a club, and then he failed. After that, he can't remember anything. Appa begged for mercy because he thought he was going to be killed. He was really hoping to be spared, but the ringleader claims Appa knows who turned him into a phantom. But he denied it, then started calling the police for help, claiming that everyone should follow the law. As it turned out, the word law only made the ringleader laugh, causing him to draw his sword from its sheath, and then assured him that there were no laws in the world Appa now found himself in, so the phantoms would only die. The leader sliced him in half with a single blow, blood spilling all over the place, and it looked pretty spectacular. He also added that there is no mercy for phantoms, and with a second blow, he completely severed the man's body. The next day at the New Odor House number 18, there was an emaciated Lee standing outside in the evening. He called Bei stupid because he's already explained that he's not going to become a lawman under any circumstances. But Bei told him to shut up and claimed that there might be a phantom in the house. And since Lee was free, they'd inspect the house together. But Lee wasn't really free, and Ba decided to do it. So she tricked Lee by telling him she had to deliver food to the house. 10 minutes ago, in a convenience store, Lee was sitting quietly, and at one point he got a phone call. He picked up the phone and introduced himself on behalf of the convenience store. The person on the other end of the line introduced herself as living in the New Odor House, number 18, and she asked him to deliver 2 cups of ramen, 2 bottles of Coca-Cola, 2 kimbap, and 2 sausages. Lee approved that their delivery guy is not in the store at the moment, so we'll have to wait an hour. But at that point, the girl said if he came in the next 10 minutes, she'd throw in a $50 tip. He couldn't have expected that, and of course he decided he couldn't pass up the chance, so he stood up abruptly and said he'd come out right away. That's why Lee can't understand how she manages to maintain her image as a model girl at school, and he thought that if people knew what she was really like, they'd think she was worse than a phantom. Bei just ordered him to shut up and began to tell him that when she looked through the reports, she found out that there had been a lot of incidents in this house, and also some people assumed that it was a ghost's work, and how she thought Lee should already know how strong she is against phantoms. But she's a little scared against ghosts, so Bei called out to Lee, which made him just a little upset. They decided not to bother and just kick the door down because it's haunted anyway. He was ready to look at that ghost and deal with it as soon as possible, but when they got inside, they were very surprised at what they saw. It was pretty creepy inside, and apparently there was some kind of barrier. But Lee reassured Bei that such simple tricks won't work on him, so there's nothing to worry about. To break the barrier, he used a special technique called flame spreading. That barrier was really just a child's joke to Lee, and with one move he broke it down. It's beautiful, and not as creepy as it was a few minutes ago. Lee decided to show off, affirming how incredibly good he was. A little pleased with his success, he suggested we go find this so-called ghost. At that moment, Bei became sharply interested in some object in the distance, namely, a figure in the shadows, and the creature looked like a real ghost, at least until the dust settled, and it was hard to make out what was there. Lee realized that the ghost had finally shown up, and he could deal with it, then go back to his business, and he didn't much care whether the creature was actually a ghost or not, so he wanted to start by introducing himself. Through his power, he gave one powerful tug and told the ghost to taste the super explosive fist. However, it was some little girl who called out the name Appa and was all in tears. Bei didn't hesitate to slap Lee immediately, ordering him not to move. He was very angry and wanted to know the reason for this behavior. So Ba explained that she thought Lee was going to hit the baby, and she couldn't let that happen. After this little argument, they sat down next to the kid and started asking her who she was. Her eyes were very interested in new people. Because of her silence, Lee decided to press her, ordering her to tell him everything she knows while he's being kind, and decided to threaten her by saying that Appa is terrible when he's angry. Suddenly, the girl began to cry sharply, and in her eyes, you could see fear and pain. It was because she thought Lee was scary, which made him very surprised and confused, and Bei was angry. She slapped him a second time for every time he screwed up. This made Lee even more angry, and he realized that this girl could be a phantom like Appa, and beating him up was as stupid and wrong as possible. Bei ignored those words and walked over to the girl, asking her too to ignore Lee and tell her everything that happened. The girl said that she was waiting for her daddy because he told her to wait, So this girl named Sai-hee waited, but her daddy hasn't come back yet, and Sei-hee is cold and hungry, but she keeps waiting. But the strange people kept coming, and it was scary because her dad might not find Sei-hee when he got back because of the strange people. They both walked down the night street in silence, after which Lee decided to talk things over quickly with BA. He also decided to smoke a cigarette to reduce his anxiety. BA starts by saying that this girl is a ghost, and BA thinks that if they grant her a wish or remove the ties that bind her to this world, there's a chance she could rest in another world. After hearing her words, Lee sighed, trying to find the right words to say, and then he said he'd take care of it, which made Bae very nervous. She didn't like that, so she asked what exactly Lee meant. As it turned out, Lee had been talking about what she was thinking, and had decided to make a point of saying that this girl was already a ghost, and BA couldn't turn her back into a human, so he thought he should just end it. And maybe this really was the best outcome for this girl. BA once again slapped him and called him a cruel bastard, then forbade him to touch Sei-hee, and if he disobeyed, BA would never forgive him. He let her do whatever she wanted, but then he'd go back to the store and keep working. BA thought Lee was cruel, claiming that he was unable to empathize and understand people's feelings. He continued to be silent, so she called him a cruel bastard and thought about how she wouldn't leave Sei-hee like this and would find a way to help him without killing him. When she got to the house, Sei-hee assumed that BA had gotten into a fight with Lee over her, so Sei-hee thought she had done something wrong and had to leave, but BA stopped her, telling her that she didn't have to worry and she could stay in the house. Then she promised the girl that she would help her find Sei-hee's father, and she really believed her. They made a promise to each other, a special promise not to be broken. The next day, school was already out, and were being moved to that point. Lee was sleeping on his desk as usual. Someone was talking about plans for the day, and BA was finishing reading something. But at one point she asked judgmentally if Lee was going to get up from that desk. However, Lee started talking facts about how it was Bae's job to exterminate ghosts and phantoms, so there was no point in going out of his way for a little ghost. BA disagreed and argued that the only purpose of a law mage is to uphold justice, and that doesn't mean they should kill every ghost they encounter, so she thinks Lee shouldn't be such a selfish jerk. It was starting to irritate Lee, so much so that he even stood up and got ready to speak. He decided he'd give Bae a week to help the girl find her father. Then, if she failed, he'd deal with her himself. She was glad and thankful, because now she realized that Lee wasn't so soulless. After a while, they were together in a club and played various games. After playing for a while, Lee fell asleep, and BA could barely hold on to the keys. After that, they were handing out flyers on the street, trying to find their father, and as it turned out, only Lee was playing games on those computers, and BA was typing. With a lot of wasted time and effort, they were both pretty upset, but when Bae saw the girl, she immediately became cheerful and asked her to draw her daddy. She showed a drawing of a man trying to kill another man. It really surprised and alarmed Lee and Bae, causing their motivation to plummet. It's been exactly 5 days, and nothing has changed in those 5 days. Still can't find my father. They were sitting in a cafe eating noodles and talking about the case. They only had 2 days left, and Lee tried to explain to her that the girl's father had disappeared a long time ago. So there was a good chance he was already dead, so there was no point in continuing. B pretended not to know what he was getting at. Lee explained that what he was trying to say was that they had already done everything they could. So as much as he felt sorry for the child, he had to do what he had to do. But Bae didn't want to hear it, so she chased Lee away and told him he didn't have to help her anymore, because she had told him earlier that she would definitely find the girl's father, and she had made her promise to her. On the 6th day, Bae was walking around in an art school camo, interested in something that was there. She was looking for a particular office, and she found it, and it was office number 7. The room was very noisy, and everyone was doing their own thing. Some were on their phones, some were discussing girls, and some were hitting on girls. There was also a man sitting in this office who was wearing headphones, and someone was approaching him. It was B who walked up to this man and tried to talk to him. This guy recognized her, and with a smile on his face, he asked why she was here. As it turned out, she had a specific request for this man named Sunbae. At which point we are transported to day 7, on Lee, who was very serious. Walking into the house, he thought about today being the last day, and since he had made it clear what he was going to do, he would follow through with what he had planned, even if BA resented him, even though he really wishes he'd never met the kid. But now he has no choice. He was getting ready to enter the house, and was really ready to do what he had in mind, though it was hard for him too. As he was about to go in, a familiar voice was heard behind him, and he realized that one of the people was B. They got closer and closer, and the guy was unusual, and there was a man walking with them. The man began to recognize the house, even though it was rather ugly in appearance. Bae asserted that if he went inside, he would be very surprised, but even so, he must go through, and the man agreed as he was offered money for it. Sunbae noticed Lee, who was behind this small pillar. He abruptly started telling Bae that she was a law mage from the Celestial Association, and she should know perfectly well that she shouldn't break the rules of their organization, and he gave the example of contacting an unregistered law wizard or releasing a captured phantom. Even the fact that it was BA didn't give Sunbae a reason to turn a blind eye. But at this point, she decided to divert attention by asserting that he was too serious, and it was rather strange that he should so suddenly start talking about it. And she added that she remembered the rules and would not have broken. And Lee was shocked at how easily and quickly his worries were resolved, which could have revealed this whole history between them. And they finally decided to go inside. And while Seihi was chatting with the teddy bear, asking his opinion on whether her daddy was coming. Upon entering the house, the man was incredibly surprised to see a child sitting in the house. The girl recognized him and realized it was her father she'd been waiting for. Bae confirmed that it was, and it was his daughter, although they had a hard time finding him, but they managed it. But the man immediately began to deny the fact and could not understand how it could happen. He couldn't believe it was really the Seihi he knew. The girl cried and started claiming she was his daughter, Sahi. Bae was happy to see the family reunited and thanked Sunbae for his help, though Sunbae realized what they had done and what would happen now. A man can't believe that this is real and that this girl is really standing in front of him. He got really scared, and he started talking about how he had to leave as soon as possible. Seihi cried and started talking about how long she had waited for her father. And finally today, they were reunited, which the girl was very happy about, but only because she can finally kill him. The man was confused and couldn't understand why this was happening. So he thought it was unrealistic because she had died on the same day. But the only person who should have died that day, Seihi thought, was her father. He began to beg for help, at which point Sunbae began to draw his sword. Sunbae stopped Seihi simply by pulling out his blade and placing it in front of her. He couldn't understand how a phantom could attack a human being in front of a law wizard who was in charge of eliminating such phantoms. The first move he used was called the Big Bear Carp, and with that punch, he threw Seihi incredibly hard right into the wall. For him, the statement that phantoms are just phantoms was a lie. Sunbae considered them mere creatures who were born solely to create evil and wreak havoc among ordinary people who could not fend for themselves. He called Bae naive, so he asked her to watch and learn, because that's what happens when a law mage pities and sympathizes with a phantom. She was crying, and she couldn't understand why this was happening, because goodness was reciprocated by goodness. But Seihi, who was a phantom, apparently didn't think so. Sei wished nothing but death for everyone in the room, and most of all for her father, whom she hated. Sunbae didn't like that, because what she was saying only meant that she still had some strength left. He was going to take the evil spirit out of Seiha by pulling the katana out of her body, but at that moment, she asserted that she would kill him first. She attacked Sunbae without hesitation, which made it clear that she didn't care about the identity of the person. She would kill anyone in her way, or anyone who stood in the way of her goal. However, she was too naive, and Sunbae began to use his next trick called blooming carp brains. It was a kind of callback, and thanks to this technique, a lot of fish started appearing around him and flying through the air. The phantom really stopped raging inside that body. Sunbae realized that this was the end and went to kill Sei. And at that moment, Bae asked him to stop, because the child might not be a phantom anymore. But Sunbae had a cold mind, so he thought it was all nonsense. It didn't matter to him whether they were young, old, or holding no grudge. Just because of these countless reasons, Bae's determination shouldn't waver every time, because after all, they're just phantoms, and there's no mercy for them. But the moment Sunbae wanted to kill that girl, Lee came out of nowhere and said that Sunbae needed to know when to stop showing off. He grabbed the sword blade of such a strong man with his bare hands, but Sunbae ordered him to stay out of his way and not to prevent the wizard of the law from doing his job. And he claims he warned Lee not to contact Bae outside of school, and there won't be a second warning. Lee didn't seem bothered by it at all, and he looked like he was ready to fight right now. Literally, in an instant, the sword was in Lee's hands, and now Sunbae was in the worst possible position. Bae couldn't understand why he was here, and Lee apologized, stating that he had come here to end the creature himself, and as Sunbae had said, phantoms are just phantoms, and there was no way to get them out of that state, and she was disappointed about it, because even her friend was of that opinion, and had no pity for the child. But Lee tried to explain to B.A. that Seiha didn't even have a physical body. That's why she was the embodiment of anger and resentment, and she had shackles chained to her feet. Also claw marks on her neck. The floor is stained with her fingernails. You have to consider all these factors that indicate who she really is, and the drawing she drew earlier, depicting a not happy scene where she's playing with her father. It was drawn in pain. She was acting out a scene where her drunken dad beat her to death. Sihi tried to run away from her father, but he caught her and started beating her. Despite her pleas to stop and apologies, he kept going. He called her a useless piece of trash and wished her dead just like his mother, who died the same way. Her father was an alcoholic, always came home drunk as a skunk, and beat up his only child at home and then go to sleep like nothing happened. So it's more likely that Seihi died from the pain she received every day for a long period of her life. It must have been a very, very bitter death. So bitter that she wanted to become a ghost and get revenge on her father no matter what. He was telling it all while standing in front of Sunbae, and Bae was shocked at the story, at how cruel her father was, and how he could do this to her at all. But no matter what her past was, she is still a phantom, and there is no way to turn her. But this child died in misery because of her monstrous father, and was forced to become a phantom because of the painful resentment of the situation. And Sunbae didn't even try to find out the circumstances of this poor child, just tried to execute her, which is why Lee didn't see it as the justice that the Heavenly Association believes in. At that moment, Sunbae suddenly used a technique called the Dance of Truth. He made a dash and was a very short distance from Lee, and was about to grab the sword by its blade, then asserted that any phantom must be exorcised no matter what its circumstances. He was able to grab his sword and attack Lee, but Lee was able to dodge the sword. But he wasn't going to stop there, so he threw a second lightning strike. Lee couldn't understand how you could protect and save human trash like that man, and mercilessly exterminate all phantoms. So if that's the beliefs of a law mage, then he will never be part of it, part of such a system and moral values with priorities. Right after saying that, he used an incredibly powerful attack. Sunbae was surprised at such strength because even he couldn't hold back such a push. He fell and realized that Lee had such great law power without the use of any law entities. It was a staggering realization, because of which he couldn't even imagine who Lee was. And on top of that, Sunbae couldn't even find the law tattoo that any law wizard should have. That's why he also thought Bae wasn't naive, but had a soft heart, which is why she wanted to handle the situation herself. Because sending that child and that human waste to the next world is his definition of justice, and he was going to take care of it before BA got here, but he was too late. But it turned out that she had a capable law mage with her to help, so he was going to leave. But after listening to all the nonsense that Sunbae was saying outside, Lee couldn't hold back anymore, and Sunbae knew that this human trash was the father of that child, knew how that child died, but pretended not to be aware of the situation. So that's why Lee decided to do what he did. Lee decided that as long as he was here, Sunbae wouldn't come within a meter of Seihi, but he thought Lee was overconfident, and Sunbae didn't care about Lee's justice or what he believed in. To Sunbae, Lee is only an unofficial law mage who needs to be taught a lesson. However, to Lee he was ridiculous, and he considered him a common loon of heavenly association. At this point, Sunbae used his technique called Blooming Carp Rain, and Lee used Victory Lights. It was a clash between two very powerful mages of the law who had different perspectives on the situation. To Bae, this battle seemed unbelievable, especially for her current level of strength. But Sunbae was shaking because Lee's punch was really strong. He decided to give a final warning to Lee, though really he just realized that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for him to cope. But Lee himself thought it was ridiculous, and it was annoying that for both Sunbae and BA, it was an eternal problem to understand Lee. So he decided to reiterate that he'd deal with the Phantom himself. But first up was Seihi's father, who was a piece of human waste. Lee then began to prepare a new attack, just like the speech. Lee punched him as hard as he could and asked Sunbae better not think he would get out of his way. That punch really hurt even a fighter like him. Sunbae still couldn't understand how it could be that he didn't have a law tattoo on his arm, and he was so powerful. He couldn't understand how it was possible that the Celestial Association didn't know he existed. But anyway, he wasn't going to warn Lee anymore, and now he was going to get really serious. And since Lee refused to leave, Sunbae was ready to send them both to the next world, without a drop of guilt. After saying that, he used a very strong technique called the Dance of Serenity, which could do damage to Lee. And it was true. Lee started to show a lot of cuts, and he was screaming in pain. Sunbae states that he's really sorry that Seihi died so unfairly. However, she tried to kill a person by becoming a phantom, and that's something he never forgives anyone, ever. But Lee stopped him again, and reiterated that as long as he was alive, he wouldn't let Seihi lay a finger on him. Seihi herself was amazed that some man would not let her be killed, even at the cost of his own life. And that's when she hugged him and told him he could stop now. She thanked him for going to such lengths for her. Seihi continued talking, and began to remember that the last few days she had spent with Lee and BA had been the happiest of her life. She also realized she shouldn't be here anymore, so she thanked Lee and apologized for lying. And now she's not sad anymore. She can come back in the next life if she's ever reborn. They were all incredibly surprised at this behavior, for it was far too strange for phantoms. Then she slowly began to fall apart and go to the next world of her own free will. Lee fell to his knees and thought about what a relief it was, and he really hoped she would be happy in her new place. And he also wished he could apologize for doubting her before. Sunbae was angry that Lee had sent Seihi to another world, which meant he wasn't competent enough to be a law mage. Lee figured this was really the end for him, and he had no regrets. But at that moment, something sharply struck Lee from behind. It was someone who made Bei and Sunbei shocked without being able to say a word. It was a certain president who grabbed Lee right by the head and was about to do something. He said about Lee going overboard again. Apparently he was familiar with him. That's why he was smiling. Lee woke up a little at a time and his eyes opened, seeing some man in front of him who claimed that to die at the peak of his youth would be a fatal mistake. Everything seemed incredibly noisy to him, but he could make out a little of what they were talking about. The moment Lee fully opened his eyes, the president was surprised and claimed that Lee had been asleep for so long that the president thought he was dead. Waking up, he could not understand who these people were, or where he was, or for what reason. The president said that they were in the maternity hospital, and if it wasn't for them, Lee would have died. But Lee asked for more details because he couldn't understand what was going on here anyway. The first thing Lee wanted to clarify was the location and whether they were actually in the maternity ward. He started talking about how it was all just a little mistake, so Lee shouldn't worry about it, because their location is just the only hospital in the area. At which point a nurse came into the room and was surprised by what she saw. And when he saw that the president, whom she called a guardian, was smoking, he immediately asserted that smoking was forbidden in the hospital, and that his behavior would only kill the patient, and that it was urgent to put out the cigarette. He, in turn, immediately started to justify himself, saying that he had only just found out about it. And then he thought about the fact that there are too many mistakes going on today. And at the end, the nurse said, if she ever saw anyone smoking again, she'd send them out the door. But the president said it wouldn't happen again and sent her out the door. When the nurse came out, the man decided to introduce himself, calling himself president of the Van Beckman Nonprofit Association, and those behind him, Bei and Sunbei, were his disciples. Lee was surprised by this, and Beckman realized from Lee's reaction that he had heard of him, and he knows that there are rumors of him being a legendary figure, but it's really not like that at all. But Lee claimed to know who Beckman is, and he's not a legendary figure, but someone who sees a woman and immediately chases after her, sees men, immediately draws his sword, and according to Lee, his disciples are just like him. Lee went on to say that 80% of what Beckman said was wrong, and that he smokes wherever he wants to, even though he should know that he's not supposed to smoke inside. In an instant, Bei screamed and turned away abruptly while covering her eyes with her hands. Lee didn't realize what was happening to her at first, because nothing had happened. But Beckman was quick to explain that down between Lee's legs, there was nothing covered. Lee was very angry, not understanding how such a thing could be allowed to happen. And since when a patient's underwear was removed, and as it turned out, this place was an obstetrics and gynecology department. 20 minutes later on the walk, Beckman was telling Lee not to sweat it so much, because Bei and Sunbei were unlikely to be able to see much from the angle they were standing at. He was also wrapped in bandages, but at this moment, Lee asked him to be quiet, for he didn't want to talk only about this topic all the time. Beckman started to talk about getting closer because of this, but he decided to stop talking about it and better move on to getting his students to apologize to Lee and then go on to a brighter future. They actually started to bow and apologize, and when Beckman called them good men, Lee started to angrily reply that apologies alone wouldn't change anything, and Lee decided to quickly ask what they were going to do with his hospital shields. At that moment, Sunbei volunteered to be the one to punish Lee for how rude he had behaved that day. Sunbei felt sick at the words of the president. He really is in the wrong place. After a short time, they decided to both walk out of there. Beckman claimed to have seen his abilities before, and they were impressive. Then he asked what his teacher was like. He was surprised that Lee was self-taught, which meant he was a real genius. So he offered him to be his apprentice. But Lee refused saying he needed to earn money. Beckman realized his family situation wasn't the best. But Lee was angry that he cared so much, and he thought Beckman was trying to give him money. Beckman talked about how he wasn't rich, but he had money and was willing to give Lee $1,000,001, and that would be his part-time paycheck to him. He explained that it's a basic payment to the Heavenly Association, and after he pays his hospital bills, he can do whatever he wants with them. But Lee stopped him and claimed to know that $1,000,000 was a lot of money. But he didn't understand, wasn't working for the Celestial Association, the kind of job where you had to put your life on the line. He also explained that he wasn't really interested in being a law mage or being part of the Celestial Association. His only dream was to live a normal life, so he just wanted to be let go. Beckman realized how impatient Lee was, so he reiterated that the $1,000,000 was to pay for his part-time job. He also wanted to live an ordinary life, but they are both bound by certain circumstances. But in fact, the life of a law mage in the Celestial Association is not so bad, if only because he does not have to worry about starving to death. Beckman explained that he had to sign a contract, work for the Celestial Association for about a year, and he could be hired as a full-time law wizard, and they were making $20,000,001, and the pay also included living expenses. In normal circumstances, most contracts do not include an internship, but this one is tailor-made for him, and after 2 years, he will decide whether to stay or go.